Okay, great. So this is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. We have 3 members present, which gives us a quorum. So we're going to get going, and in the hopes that others join as well in the next couple minutes. So the agenda just got thrown in the chat. I can share it on my screen too. It looks like this. We have some housekeeping of approving minutes. And then we wanted to spend a good chunk of time of today talking about the December, a draft council agenda for December, and also a little bit of outlook for 2024. And you'll see I put those right in here in the agenda so we could have them to look at. So that's what we're going to do for a little while, both December and then the outlook of 2024 council meetings. And then we want to take a peek at an update to the work planning document, which I can share on my screen, and talk a little bit about the technical analysis process. We got to leave some time for subcommittee appointments. Jane has a new sheet there to look at. And then there's a very short piece about, or potentially short piece, about a plan to brief the council on the work that the Climate Action Office and ANR is doing for the Priority Climate Action Plan, which is the federal funding plan for emissions reductions. So that's what we want to do. We do have public comment scheduled for the end of this. Well, let's make time for that. And we've just got an hour together today. So before we get going on any quick reactions to the agenda? Steering committee members? Okay, let's do it then. You can see these minutes are linked in the chat. Does anybody need a little more time to link through them? Excuse me, link through the agenda. Anybody need a little time to link through here?
Not on that, David, but I did want to just pause and ask, because it's not 100% clear in my mind, and maybe it's worth pulling up the governance document in terms of if we're going to make a decision. I know it's a fairly
decision.
It seemed like a formality to approve the minutes, but it's not 100% clear to me that quorum is 3 members of the steering committee versus 4, and I just want to pause on that. And
sure.
I don't know if anyone has the
I can pull that up.
Version of the governance document handy. I thought that quorum was a majority of the committee, and since we're 6, I think we need 4 rather than 3. Oh, and there's Julie, so it's a moot point.
There we go. Even better. Okay, but for the future, Jared, definitely take the point. Let's double check on that so we know we're all confident about that. Secretary Moore, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry to be late.
Just in time, actually, because it saves us from the discussion whether quorum was 3 or 4.
Oh, well, glad to be here.
Which we need to resolve. So I absolutely take that point, Jared, and thank you for bringing it up. Julie, we were just approving minutes from October 16th. Would you need a second more to look at those, or any concerns you have about those?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm all good.
Any concerns from any steering committee members on the minutes? Okay, great. Let's consider those approved. All right, so let's get into the first piece of business, which is looking at the December council agenda. Like, one of your key roles as the steering committee is make sure we're teeing up the right conversations for the council. I'll pull my screen back up just with this content here. And although this doesn't allow me to take notes on it, but let's use this for now. I'm happy to walk through what we've talked about. We actually talked about this in our last steering committee meeting, if you remember. And this is just a little bit clearer look at what this might look like in the agenda in December. The things that we've spoken about before are the biomass recommendation. That'll come back to the council, and this is the time for them to do a review of the updates and make a decision on that. We want to leave a significant amount of time. We expect there'll be public input. And so we want to leave time for that discussion, that public input, and then that decision-making. The resilience priorities, again, that we've talked about this before. There's a letter from the speaker asking for some thought. This is happening. The Rural Resilience Adaptation subcommittee has met and will meet again, and they'll be ready to bring some thoughts to the council. Since this is substantive, we should probably follow what's in our process document, which is this is kind of like an initial look and discussion, and then probably need to finalize that in January. But we can talk about that in just a moment when we look at the outlook for January in the next year.
David, are you anticipating that the Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee is going to come in with sort of a draft letter to the speaker? Okay, I see Jane nodding.
Jane's nodding. Jane's been more involved. My colleague, Catherine Morris, has been helping that group. I haven't been, so I'm not as close.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a draft letter is probably what's going to happen.
Great.
So they've got one more meeting to do that. So yeah, that's a piece, and whether that's a decision-making moment or whether that's a first read kind of moment in providing input, and then that's resolved in January. Let's talk about it. We certainly, in our process document, talk about how we like to do two bites at any kind of content. Then a quick check-in on work planning in the year ahead and what the council should expect for its work going forward into 2024 and 2025. Then there's a commitment to preview the draft of the report to the legislature that the Climate Action Office will be preparing for the council, and agree on points of feedback for that report. And then there's a very minor but not insignificant update that's needed to our process roadmap, because we're not as clear as we should be about the process for selecting subcommittee co-chairs. And that's just a little gap that we need to resolve. So that's something to make sure we spend the time to resolve that in the council. And then additional public comment. So that's what we have. One thing I'll note is when you all spoke about this last time, you spoke also about talking about the state hazard mitigation plan is a key piece to talk about. And when we look at January, we're imagining kind of like an all-day workshop type thing in January, where that would be a nice component of that. So that kind of got bumped to January. That was just so if anybody was paying attention the last time we spoke about this.
Can I ask a question there? And it may be a question as much for Jane as anyone. Is there somebody from VEM that's participating in the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee now, just to have the connection at least at that level, and whatever the letter response will be if we wait to have the presentation till later?
Yes. Yeah, there's both Stephanie Smith and Ben Rose, as well as Eric, all Ben and Stephanie staff the subcommittee, and Eric sits on it.
Okay. And Michelle, do you want to say something about that?
Sorry about that. I just wanted to check while we're talking about January. I see potential transportation addendum. Oops, sorry, my video didn't come on. I'm wondering what that is. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Good for flagging that. And I think Jared can speak to that. And Jared, I don't know if your hand went up for that purpose or for a different purpose.
It went up for a different purpose, but I'm happy to address that. So Cambridge Systematics presented the draft carbon reduction strategy to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee at the last committee meeting. And based on that and the identified gap between the projected gap between emissions in the transportation sector in 2030 and the requirements of the Solutions Act, it has made clear that we need to go back and add more specificity to transportation sector recommendations, given the gap that emerged in the climate action plan without the Transportation Climate Initiative in particular. So there will be a transportation task group meeting today, actually right after this meeting, to discuss that, and then it will be a topic on the next cross-sector mitigation subcommittee on November 30th. I actually want to request that we provisionally add time at the December council meeting to consider any recommendations that may emerge from cross-sector out of our next meeting with regard to transportation recommendations. So that would be a suggested revision to the proposed agenda in December. But I do have two other questions, points on the agenda to come back to once we've discussed this.
Thanks. And I recognize that I'm not a member of this subcommittee, but since our agency is the author of that report, I guess I'd like to clarify how the outcomes of that report are going to be integrated in this body of work. It would be my understanding that rather than creating additional addendums to the climate action plan, which I think we've discussed this in the past, that we would perhaps consider the information provided in the carbon reduction strategy for transportation, which is a federal requirement under the Federal Highway Administration. So it's not a document of the legislature or the climate action plan, but a federally required document that if there is additional analysis that might be suggested that would arise from that report, that would be contemplated as part of the climate action plan update process, rather than contemplated as a recommendation for any changes to the climate action plan.
Great. So the dilemma facing you all in the transportation group that's going to meet today is this something that you want to push as an additional addendum? Because we do have a transportation addendum that was agreed to last year. Is this something you'd want to push as an additional transportation addendum right now in the near term? Or is this something that's going to fundamentally guide the update process, the climate action plan, right? That's kind of one of the decision points you all will need to be wrestling with.
Yeah, and I would say that the current transportation addendum, I think, acknowledged the fact that the plan had been to recommend that we join TCIP until a few weeks before the plan came out, and that there had not been enough time to figure out what is going to replace TCIP. I think what we are hoping to come forward with as the Transportation Working Group to the cross-sector subcommittee on the 30th is a plan to replace TCIP. And if cross-sector approves that, then it goes to the council as a recommendation from cross-sector as what's going to replace and fill in that gap. And I think, to Jared's point, it looks as though the carbon reduction strategy won't fill the whole gap. So there remains a need for something else to fill the gap. And I think that's what the expectation is, that cross-sector will approve transportation's plan, and that will then become a recommendation to the full council in December to contemplate the presentation in December and then the decision at the next council meeting.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, Michelle, and just to be clear, we in this meeting don't need to resolve that, right? We need to think about the schedule of conversations that we want to have as a council. And I think if you're having concerns like Michelle, for instance, like, seems like that's not the pathway we would suggest, then we can flag those now and make sure that those happen in the respective conversations of the transportation group, cross-sector, et cetera. But yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I'm not clear about is the role of task groups at this point. I might have missed something, but I was not understanding the task groups were still active as a formal part of the Climate Council process. And I would also state that I would like to see the carbon reduction strategy, that the full council be briefed on the strategy before they receive recommendations as to next steps. And I'm not sure what the date is for our January meeting, but I had also hoped to brief the legislative transportation committees in advance of briefing the Climate Council on the carbon reduction strategy final document. So those are just some date pieces and some process pieces I want to put in there.
Okay, that's really helpful. Secretary Moore, and again, I want to, as much as possible, pull it back to the set of conversations we want to set up with the council. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I just wonder how this squares with our process roadmap. And I was trying to rummage through my email and find the most current version. I was unsuccessful. But I know we've got a lot of moving pieces around updating the plan and timing, and I'm just worried that we're going to end up in this space of constant revisions. And I understand there's a gap there. I'm just not sure this aligns with legislative intent for how the Climate Council is supposed to operate.
Okay. With the concern, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that if we had identified in the initial plan, we had a couple of areas that we didn't finish our work on. We've done additional work in those areas. We have an update to the climate plan on the horizon, like the sort of constant updates or evolution of the climate plan. That's not to say people can advocate for whatever the policy outcomes are that they feel are necessary and tie back to the Global Warming Solutions Act. But is the climate action plan itself intended to be this
rolling vehicle,
constantly evolving document? Because we don't have the capacity to support that. And I have real concerns as we get into substantive policy recommendations that there's no process in place to take these out to the public the way we did when we do the whole plan update.
Okay. Great. So some real questions about how the public would be engaged in a significant policy recommendation, such as proposing a transportation policy recommendation along the lines of a substitute for TCFD. Okay.
Right. And acknowledging we're about to step into a 15-month long process or 18-month long process to update the climate action plan that has some really intentional public engagement components to it, and how we square those pieces.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. Jared?
I think it's a fair question overall about the process regarding updates, but this to me is something that we explicitly identified in the initial climate action plan as a gap in an area that needed further recommendation, and that was planned for. So I don't think that this is kind of coming out of the blue. And with regard to Michelle's point, the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee has been briefed on the carbon reduction strategy. And so what I am asking for is that we provisionally create the space in case there is a recommendation that comes from the cross-sector subcommittee, as was identified in the first cap as additional necessary recommendations on the transportation side. My expectation, the subcommittee will need to decide what the subcommittee wants to recommend. My anticipation is that it will primarily be a process recommendation rather than a finished policy recommendation. I don't think we're going to know that until that subcommittee meets on November 30th. But in the event that there is a decision to provide a recommendation for the council's consideration, and I agree with Michelle on the point that if there is a recommendation that comes from cross-sector on transportation, policies or processes going forward, that the council should be briefed on the kind of findings of the carbon reduction strategy. I just don't want to preclude the possibility that a recommendation, as we had already identified, is still a missing piece, may possibly come forward. So I just want to keep time provisionally available. We'll see how the process unfolds, but this to me is something that was already identified as a need that has not been filled. The addendum that we did on transportation was kind of an interim addendum until we identified that for now, here is the recommended set of policy options until we get the additional analysis from the carbon reduction strategy that was specifically noted. And now we have that. So now it's time to take step 2 on that missing set of recommendations or process.
Okay. Bram, and so just so you're clear, I'm taking away an interest, at least from Jared and potentially others, of creating some space in December to update folks on what's going on around the transportation conversations, and potentially put something on the table that then would need a subsequent set of meetings, 1 or more meetings, to make some decisions on. Bram?
Just to respond to Secretary Moore's concern about ongoing revisions, I do feel as though transportation is a special case because of the very last minute becoming the part of the plan becoming unviable at the very last minute before publication. And as Jared said, we noted, hey, we had a plan, it's not viable, so we need some time to create a replacement for that. And as we noted, we need to see the carbon reduction strategy. So, I don't think we're in danger of.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think it's really a public process question, that this would be a substantial policy recommendation. We have sort of a plan in place to engage the public in the larger conversation about the document. And I'm uncomfortable making additions to the climate plan without some degree of public engagement, or of this magnitude potentially without some degree of public engagement.
So how about if we summarize it this way, right? And I want to test actually for the full steering committee, and if we need to quick raise hands on this, let's do it. But there's an interest in making some space on December's agenda to talk about what's been going on in the transportation, what will be going on in the transportation task group in cross-sector. We don't know yet because they're meeting this afternoon and cross-sector's meeting later in the month, right? But make some space, and probably make some space in the January thing once we talk about that. At the same time, what I'm hearing are significant concerns about putting a major policy initiative on the table without a robust process of public engagement like what's being planned for in 2024 around the overall set of things that are happening in 2024 and 2025. So those two things I'm hearing, right? And we don't have an answer to that because we're still in this hypothetical place of what cross-sector might do, right? Where Jared says it may be a process recommendation more than a specific policy recommendation. So we're in a kind of a weird place. We don't quite know. But that's what I'm taking away from this conversation. I'm curious, if we take away those two things of interest in making some time for the council, interest in putting out there that it doesn't feel like we're baking in appropriate public engagement if we sort of move quickly on a major policy thing. Are folks comfortable with that as a result of this conversation? That we'll make a little bit of space in December and we'll make some space in January and see what happens? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll just say, we'll have to wait to see what comes out of the cross-sector meeting, but I think that second concern is moot because I really do not expect a final formal policy recommendation to come forward. It is a recommendation of next steps, given that we're now at the next step in the process that was identified when we passed the transportation addendum that said the next step in the process is looking at the analysis from the carbon reduction strategy and then pointing a way forward of what to do next.
Okay, great. Kristen, then Liz, and then let's get into some additional conversation about the pathway in 2024 for the council.
Thanks. I just wonder, given this conversation, if there's a way to reduce the amount of time that's on the schedule for December, so that that is merely just previewing an intent to come back on an issue to present in January, as opposed to like presenting really, it doesn't sound like we're going to be able to present anything on December. To take 25 minutes seems excessive, when really what I think maybe Jared's talking about is just providing a roadmap to what discussions are taking place and the potential for substantive decisions to be discussed and presented to the council at later dates later in the year. So I wonder if that's a 5-minute just kind of preview of, we're having these discussions, depending on where these discussions go, we may be coming back with a more robust presentation and discussion later in the January meeting or beyond.
Okay. How do folks feel about that? Liz, was that taking care of what you were going to say?
We can move on. It was on timing. I was going to ask how we're going to fit it in. Wondered if it could be a part of the work planning update that's already on the agenda with the time shown there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to make an important distinction. I don't think that this is an update. I think that there's a potential recommendation on process to be considered and, approved by the council as a way forward. So I would prefer that we hold 25 minutes provisionally, and I would suggest that we extend the meeting time rather than cutting time from or taking out something already on the agenda, to make sure that we are covering the work that we need to be considering and doing together, rather than everything continuing to get, or so many things continuing to get pushed. Again, we'll know more after November 30th. We'll have another steering committee to discuss the final agenda in December. But for now, given the possibility of a recommendation on a process forward for the council to consider, which I don't think is just an update, I would like to provisionally hold 25 to 30 minutes in the agenda for that potential presentation from cross sector.
Graham, were you going to say something?
Simply that I agree that given the path forward, that the transportation working group is going to make a recommendation to cross sector, which cross sector may accept, and therefore want to recommend to the full council that we should hold time in the council meeting for a recommendation as a first reading precedent to a decision at a subsequent council meeting. I think Jared's point that this is given our discussion on the transportation working group, it is unlikely to be we recommend that Vermont join WCI, for instance, as an example. It is not going to be a recommendation of a single option. It's much more likely, as Jared said, to be a process recommendation. We recommend that we fully study and understand the implications of these three possible routes. It is also true that transportation is a really important contributor to Vermont's greenhouse gases, and we are not going to meet our 2030 goals if we do not address it quickly. So, I think we need to keep moving forward, and that means possibly a recommendation to the council in December.
Okay. So as you've seen in the agenda, that we are super tight on time. Jared puts out the possibility we make this a little bit longer. I'm wondering, steering committee members, this is like really in your wheelhouse to say, yep, because you're the ones who decide how to use the council's time. So if this seems like something like, let's add a half hour in. Jane put in the chat as well that we forgot we need to spend a little time thanking counselors who have stepped off or stepping off and welcoming new counselors. Like there's a little bit of time we need to spend on that too. So if you all think that this is going to need another half hour, you're in the driver's seat to be able to say, we as steering committee would like to add a half hour of time. So I know Jared would be up for that. Other steering committee members, can I get a quick view if that seems like a pathway forward? Bram's up for it. Julie, Kristen, Liz.
Was trying to look at my calendar, but you know,
Right.
even if I'm crunched on the back end, I'm not going to object to adding additional time for an important topic. I do think we should, as we finalize the agenda, look for places where we could streamline, particularly looking at the fact that we're going to meet in person in January.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Okay. So how about this? Jane and I can go and try to figure out more precise timings on this and see what how it looks. If we can do it in the existing time, great. If not, it sounds like you all as a steering committee are open to extending out a half hour into 2:30 or something like that in the afternoon. Yeah, it's okay. I'm not seeing enthusiastic nodding, but all right. All right. So can we look at January then for a moment? And into next year, we wanted to just give a sort of outlook of what that might look like. In some of the conversations we've had on work planning and others, we've started to look at this sort of flow of January being an opportunity. Particularly, we have new counselors. We're really kicking off a whole new process of revision. Why not come together for the better part of a day, do it in person? We haven't really done that since March of last year or this year. And it's an opportunity to also do what was requested around providing some baseline information for everybody. And so it could be a nice mix of some really good informative presentations, plus some detailed look at our work planning, plus if we need to do things like the addendum or working on transportation, we can make some time for that too. So the idea was to do that, and then quarterly in March and June, and then the fall is TBD, in part because we're going to be really getting into the zone of subcommittees testing initial recommendations with the full council. So it may be a little higher velocity of meetings than just quarterly. So that's the thinking. We wanted to test that thinking with you all. Jared?
Yeah, just a note on the timing of the January meeting in light of the December proposed agenda. You know, we've identified this kind of 2-meeting process for consideration and decisions or votes by the council. And given that the legislative report is due by January 15th, and presumably, I don't remember if there was a specific deadline requested in Speaker Krowinski's letter, but presumably, you know, that would be similar timing. It is striking me that January meeting should probably occur before January 15th to ensure that there is an opportunity for the legislative report to be looked at a second time, and that decision by the council to approve it to go to the legislature. If it is due by January 15th, I think we're going to need to meet before then, given the statutory deadline of that annual report.
Okay. Others? That would mean meeting the week of January 8th. Okay. There had been a talk about meeting on Mondays because of the calendar for the legislature. Is that relevant for that week as well, or is that not relevant for that week?
No, that's relevant.
So we're talking about Monday the 8th. Okay. All right. Got to get organized.
You know, it may be, I'm just throwing it out there. We should be cognizant of whether we can get materials out in a timely and compliant manner, not to mention everybody reviewing. So it's probably a conversation with staff as much as anything as to whether Monday the 8th works.
Yeah, I would suggest we might consider, if we feel like this is a full council sign off on the report. And I can't remember last year whether it was full council sort of was apprised and then the steering committee gave final blessing, but maybe a short meeting on the 8th. I feel like planning for that a full day session is probably, it will not be as valuable as if we were later in the month.
Because it puts material development right smack in like between, holiday time. Yeah.
Correct.
Right. So that could solve your problem, Jared, if we do like a very short thing on the 8th to sign off on those two pieces that are going to legislature.
Virtual meeting, and then still do the in-person longer meeting. That's the
on the 22nd.
That sounds good.
Or the 29th. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So thanks for that input. That's great. So we could add, let's call it like an hour meeting to just approve those documents earlier in the month, and then do something on the 22nd and 29th for this day-long session. Other feedback on this outlook, and then we got to switch gears into the other piece of the agenda. Any other feedback here? And I will just note, if there are, things going on with transportation that need attention, obviously the March and June meetings can be used for that purpose too. So, all right. So that's helpful. We have one more steering committee meeting before we finalize the agenda for December. We'll get that over to you all, and we can do a final thumbs up on that next steering committee meeting. All right. Okay. So the next piece on our agenda was, we wanted to just do a quick update on what's going on in the work planning process. Jared and Jane and I and Julie met about that. A lot of J's in this crew. And from that, there was a couple things that I think is important to just mention. I can just share my screen. I apologize, we don't have a document that we've circulated around. But the latest version, again, this is what you all on the council have seen. We've been doing some nips and tucks. And I think the most important piece that we want to mention here is here about how to lay the groundwork, and particularly around the technical information inputs, is one of the things we wanted to talk about, because there's this tension between wanting to move quickly on getting out RFPs for technical consultants and like getting that going so it's useful and ready in a time that helps the subcommittees and the council. At the same time, counterbalancing that speed is making sure that subcommittees are able to identify the priority issues they want to work on and any potential priority technical analysis that would be most beneficial for them. And so we're creating these kind of two buckets of ideas of things that are kind of no-brainers of like, let's get going on this stuff now. Science and data has already talked about it. And that's bucket one. And bucket two is additional work that the subcommittee does, different subcommittees do. Science and data synthesizes that. And then there's a comparison against all that and what A&R is able to do and wants to do. So that's one piece that I wanted to mention. And then there's that very last sentence I said about looking at what A&R is able to finance an existing budget and is willing to finance. And there may be other priorities that don't fit in there. And what we talked about recently was to say, the council should feel free to go back to the legislature to say, these are priorities we think would be very helpful, help us find a way to do this work. So I just wanted to mention that part of it. And there may be other things, Julie and Jared and Jane, you want to mention about this work planning document. Anything else? Okay. One thing that's a bit of a sensitive point as well is the issue of the July 2024 deadline in GWSA and what that is and what it isn't. That's another piece here, and where I understand the conversations led to, and I'll invite Secretary Moore and Jared and others to weigh in, is that A&R can be much more explicit about how it interprets that deadline, and needs to let the council know if there will be any rulemaking happening, because that will impact what the council is working with in terms of a baseline set of information.
Right.
Right? Okay. That's me yabbering on for a while. Are there things that you all want to say quickly? That was just an update trying to let you know where that work's going and how that document's evolving. All good? Secretary Moore?
I do think, and can you put the agenda back up?
Yeah.
David, so there's a strong, and Jane can speak to this as much as anyone, need to think also. So we've got the work under the climate action plan. Jane's team also now has a set of requirements, deadlines, milestones related to our climate pollution reduction grant that tack and tie to some pieces, but not all pieces of this. And I don't know if under that work planning update or elsewhere, but I do think having an update from the climate office is going to be really important, just so people are aware of the work that A&R is doing in this space. As part of this conversation. Jane, I don't know if you want to be more specific, but I do think having that update from the climate office is going to be important, particularly as we talk about work planning, so that the council can have a sense for other efforts that are underway in the climate office.
Yeah, thanks for that, Julie. And I think that's related to the CPRG grant, as well as the broader technical analysis that's underway already in the climate office and our vision for implementing that long term. And so I've been thinking about that for the January meeting as sort of foundational work to inform the update to the CAP. And there'll also be a particular engagement component with the council around the first deliverable of the climate pollution reduction grant, which we have on the agenda actually today to talk about at the end today.
Yeah, I guess maybe it can be a very brief update sort of to Liz's earlier point, but I think having you at least outline that in the December meeting, because it touches on resilience priorities, the work planning update is going to be, I think, important context for folks to have.
Okay.
Me too.
All right.
And, honestly, David, I would put a plug in that I think a climate action office update should sort of be a standing agenda item at each climate council meeting, not unlike we've had the just transitions moment. I feel like that this is sort of 10 to 15 minutes for Jane to provide that update as a matter of course, I think is going to be important going forward.
I agree and feel like the council may have said, I feel like we had this conversation with the council and agreed that was important to keep as a standing item.
That's great.
Yeah, I recall the same thing, that the council reiterated that request.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that. In the interest of time, I'm just going to keep rolling forward, if that's okay. Yeah. And I'm rolling it forward to this. Jane, what needs to be said about this?
Really brief, to stick with process. First, I'll just say that we have 3 new climate counselors. I noticed that one of them is actually on the call today, Jael. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but she is now the farm and forest rep from the Senate appointment. And we also have new representative for Sue's seat, who Denise, who sits as the serves as the Diversity and Equity Inclusion Director for Capstone, as well as a climate planner from the Northeast RPC, who actually is serving as the Resilience and Adaptation seat. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, it's Allie Webster. Those three, along with also two new executive positions. Commissioner Winters, the DCF commissioner, has stepped off, and you may recall that he was actually a designee from the Secretary of Human Services. So Commissioner Levine of the Health Department will now serve that spot. And then, of course, as you all know, Eric Forland, who was appointed as the VEM director, it will also serve as the designee for the Commissioner of Public Service. We're holding onboardings this afternoon and tomorrow for those 5 new counselors to orient and update them. And in doing so, we'll advise them that they'll have to serve on one subcommittee, all of them. So I had hoped to have those recommendations for today, but we don't yet. So stay tuned on that. So the only formal approval you need to make here is around Andrea Wright, serving on behalf of Secretary Flynn as the administration appointee for the co-chair position for Rural Resilience and Adaptation. And beyond that, hopefully the other counselors will have seats for your next meeting.
Great.
And Jane, you said Eric for public service. I'm sure you meant public safety, just clarifying for the record.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. Yeah.
Okay. Any all good? Any questions about that? Any concerns before just saying this is good? And again, we're just today confirming Andrea Wright is the co-chair.
That sounds good. And I just want to note while we're seeing this up on the screen, it's good to see that it's been slightly updated from the previous version that wasn't as up to date. So that's great. There is just, given that we're using the notation of the asterisk to denote counselors, would just note that everybody in that second co-chair row should also have that designation, as should Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux in the science and data column.
I'll make note of that, Jared, and correct that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jared. Helpful. Anything else on this? We good? Okay. All right. And so that brings us to the last piece here, which Jane can explain. It's about the briefing the council and a plan to brief the council on what's going on for the federal funding grants and all that. So Jane, do you want to just do that? Or you like me to do it? I want to take the burden.
I'm going to do it real quick. Yeah. So thank you. Sorry, my voice is crappy. I think you all know that ANR serves as the fiscal agent for the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which is the broadest pot of state funding. That $3 million that we received sets us up as the state to be eligible to apply for the $4.6 billion application of implementation funds this spring. There are significant deliverables associated with the planning grant, the first of which is called a Priority Climate Action Plan. That's due to EPA by March 1st. On behalf of state agencies, Megan O'Toole and myself have been leading that effort and pulling together a list of priority measures that meet the objectives of that grant requirement. So mitigation, which is broadly defined to also include sequestration actions as well. And in order to meet the objectives of that, we have to roll out and do public engagement. And I should say that we're striving to turn our PCAP in early by the end of January to give us a little bit more time to pivot from the Priority Climate Action Plan to the implementation grant, because they're actually due within 30 days of each other, which would be a really tight turnaround. So we're holding specific public engagement events in December, 2 online events about the Priority Climate Action Plan, and determined that since it is so built upon the Climate Action Plan and complementary to actions in that, as well as informative as we start to think about priorities for the next Climate Action Plan, that it made sense to have a specific engagement opportunity for the Climate Council that would be tailored slightly different than the way we would educate the public about it and speak to the public around it. And so I proposed on the agenda, which I don't have in front of me, David, if you could remind me, I believe it's December 11th at lunchtime, the Monday before our climate council meeting, holding an hour and a half, that we would send out to the full council. This would not serve as a climate council meeting, so we wouldn't need quorum per se, but it would be an engagement event targeted at the climate council for you to react to and ask specific questions around the priority climate action plan.
Great. Thanks. Sound good? Any questions for folks? Any friendly amendments to what we're planning on doing there?
Jane, I'm sorry if I missed it. Do you have a time on December 11th?
11:30 to
I think
1.
it's 11:30 to 1.
11:30 to 1. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or friendly amendments for that? Okay. Super. I don't know if there's folks here who have been joining our call who would want to weigh in. I think there's only one person I don't recognize. But this is an opportunity if anybody's been listening into our call and would like to make a comment. This is a great time to do that before we finish up. Okay. I'm not seeing anybody. Feel free to use the chat too if you'd like to. All right. Anything else, folks, before we finish up? We're, Cameron's been taking notes on this. As usual, we'll put together a nice summary of that. That helps us make the action items real, like the changes to the agenda we talked about, all that good stuff. And what else? We have one more meeting before we finalize December's agenda. Jared?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the subcommittee appointments because I want to make sure that the new counselors are able to participate in those subcommittees, as soon as possible. And, maybe that's just, we say those are public meetings. So even absent a formal appointment from the steering committee, you're welcome to attend. I don't want to presume what each of the three new appointees, which subcommittee they will want to participate on, but it is interesting that of those three appointments, they are all representing kind of experience or expertise that is clearly linked to one of the subcommittees. And so I do wonder whether it's worth kind of provisionally saying, approving those three new members for the subcommittees that their seat is most directly linked to. And then if there's further requested changes, we could do that. But it does seem that, Jael's appointment representing the farm and forest sector aligns well with the ag and ecosystems subcommittee, that, Allie as the resilience coordinator at NVDA aligns with the rural resilience subcommittee, and that Denise's work with DEI at Capstone and the community action agencies aligns with just transitions. Again, don't want to, I think they should, of course, have the ability to say where they want to serve, but those seats are kind of uniquely tied to subcommittees where their experience or expertise will be especially valuable. And I wouldn't want to lose time for them to begin participating. So I wonder about provisionally approving them for those perhaps most obvious subcommittees. And then if there's a different desired outcome, we could come back to it.
How do they feel about that?
Just for follow-up, we have been sort of operating under that assumption and been sharing agendas for the rural resilience and just transition subcommittees, which are actively meeting with those appropriate counselors. So have been doing it that way. So that seems to make a lot of sense to me. And then we can discuss that in the onboarding with them.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Great. I think we're done then. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Bye.